The sunlight always enters my grandmother's house the same way. It filters through the lace curtain she has owned longer than I have been alive, casting intricate patterns across her weathered hands as she waters her prized roses in ceramic pots along the windowsill. Those hands have provided everything for me since I was 7 years old, when a late-night phone call changed our family forever. My parents never made it home from their anniversary dinner that night, and Grandma Margaret opened her doors without hesitation. Her home on Maple Street is modest but perfect, a small 3-bedroom rancher with white siding and blue shutters that my grandfather painted himself before he passed 15 years ago. The floorboards creak in all the familiar places, a map of memories I could navigate blindfolded. The faded floral wallpaper in the kitchen has witnessed thousands of Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and quiet morning coffees between a grandmother and the grandchild she unexpectedly had to raise. My brother James visits every Sunday without fail. He is 10 years older than me, already established in his career when our parents died. He wanted to take me in, but his work with private security firms meant unpredictable hours and frequent travel. Instead, he became a constant presence at Grandma's house, appearing with groceries, fixing leaking faucets, and checking the locks with the thoroughness his military background instilled in him. "Those hedges need trimming again," he would say, already rolling up his sleeves. "I will take care of it after lunch." That was James, quiet, competent, protective without being overbearing. His experiences overseas left him with a watchful vigilance that made the neighborhood kids both fascinated and slightly intimidated by him. But to Grandma Margaret, he was still her little boy who needed extra helpings of her apple cobbler. Our neighborhood has always been peaceful, an older community where most residents have lived for decades. Children ride bicycles down the middle of the street without concern. Neighbors chat across fences and share garden harvests without formality. We have never needed rules beyond common courtesy and mutual respect. There is no homeowners association here, no governing board dictating the color of our mailboxes or the height of our grass. People simply take pride in their homes because they love their community. But lately, something has changed in our quiet corner of the world. Black SUVs with tinted windows have been creeping through our streets, slowing down near certain houses. Mrs. Peterson mentioned a stranger taking photographs of her property. Mr. Abernathy reported someone measuring his fence line without permission. These incidents seemed odd but disconnected until the envelope arrived. I was helping Grandma Margaret deadhead her garden roses when the mail carrier brought it, a thick official-looking envelope with important notice, stamped across the front in aggressive red letters. The moment she saw it, something changed in her face, a shadow of worry crossing her normally serene features. "What is it, Grandma?" I asked, setting down my gardening shears. She turned the envelope over in her hands, examining the return address, Lakeside Community HOA Enforcement Division. Her brow furrowed deeply as she shook her head. "That is strange," she said quietly. "We have never had a homeowners association in this neighborhood, not in the 42 years I have lived here." She opened the envelope slowly, and as she unfolded the official-looking document inside, I watched her hands begin to tremble slightly. The large red violation notice header was visible even from where I stood. Something cold settled in my stomach as I moved closer to read over her shoulder. Whatever this was, it marked the beginning of the end of our peaceful existence. The violation notice trembled in my grandmother's hands as she read the accusations aloud, her voice growing increasingly bewildered with each item. $5,000 in fines for unauthorized garden structures. The beautiful handcrafted wooden trellis my grandfather had built for their 20th anniversary, now covered in climbing roses. Another $3,000 for unapproved vegetation species, referring to the heritage rose bushes she had cultivated for decades, some varieties so old they were passed down from her own grandmother. "This cannot be right," she whispered, reaching for her reading glasses to examine the fine print. $8,000 in fines, due within 14 days or they will place a lien against the property. I took the papers from her shaking hands and studied them carefully. The letterhead looked impressively official, complete with a gold-embossed seal and threatening legal language about covenant enforcement and community standards preservation. But something felt deeply wrong. I had grown up in this neighborhood. There had never been any mention of an HOA. That evening, I researched county records online and called several longtime neighbors. My suspicions were confirmed. No homeowners association had ever been legally established in our community. No covenants or restrictions had ever been filed with the county recorder's office. This Lakeside HOA simply did not exist in any official capacity. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. A black SUV, the same model that had been cruising our streets, parked directly in front of our house. Two men approached our front door with the confident stride of those accustomed to intimidating others. One towered well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that strained against his polo shirt. The other was shorter but carried himself with the aggressive posture of someone compensating for his stature. Both wore matching navy blue shirts with Lakeside HOA enforcement embroidered on the breast pocket. Grandma Margaret insisted on answering the door herself despite my protests. Her spine straightened as she pulled her cardigan around her shoulders, a gesture of dignity rather than fear. "Good morning, gentlemen. How may I help you?" Her voice was steady but cooler than her usual warm greeting. The shorter man stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Margaret Wilson, we are here regarding your property violations. The 14-day notice period is now reduced to 7 days due to the severity of the infractions." My grandmother stood her ground in the doorway. "There must be some mistake. This neighborhood has never had a homeowners association. I have owned this home for over 40 years. The taller man produced a binder filled with what appeared to be legal documents. The Lakeside HOA was established during the original development. Many homeowners have forgotten or ignored their obligations. We are now enforcing the covenants as outlined in the property deeds." I stepped beside my grandmother, protective instinct rising. "May I see proof of the HOA's legal registration and documentation showing this property is subject to your authority?" The shorter man's face hardened as he looked me up and down dismissively. "Young man, we represent the property interests of this community. Your grandmother signed binding agreements when purchasing this property. The fine schedule has been properly noticed according to state law." "That is not possible," I countered. "I have checked the county records. There is no registered HOA for this neighborhood." The man stepped forward, invading my personal space. His coffee-scented breath hit my face as he spoke through clenched teeth. "Listen carefully. We have legal authority to place liens, force compliance, and even initiate foreclosure proceedings if necessary. Many of your neighbors have already recognized this reality and paid their fines." Grandma Margaret's hand found my arm, squeezing gently to calm me. "Perhaps we can discuss this reasonably," she offered, though I could see fear beginning to cloud her eyes. "There is nothing to discuss," the taller man stated flatly. "You have 7 days to pay the fines in full and remove the non-compliant structures and vegetation. After that, we will begin lien proceedings." They handed her another envelope, thicker than the first, and turned without another word. As they walked back to their vehicle, I noticed my grandmother's hands were shaking as she clutched her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, a protective gesture I had rarely seen before. "They cannot do this," I assured her, though uncertainty crept into my voice. "This has to be some kind of scam." She nodded slowly, but the worry lines around her eyes had deepened. The sense of violation, strangers threatening her home, her garden, her security, seemed to age her before my eyes. As the black SUV pulled away, I made a silent promise that these men would not get away with whatever game they were playing. The next morning I began a systematic investigation, walking door to door throughout our neighborhood. The pattern that emerged was both clear and disturbing. These self-proclaimed HOA enforcers had targeted mostly elderly residents, people living alone who might be more easily intimidated by official-looking documents and authoritative voices. Mrs. Jenkins, an 84-year-old widow at the end of our street, had already paid $3,000 after receiving a violation notice for her non-compliant fence, the same white picket fence that had stood there for 30 years. Her hands trembled as she showed me the receipt, embarrassment coloring her face when I gently explained she might have been scammed. "They said they would put a lien on my house," she whispered. "I cannot afford a lawyer to fight something like that." 4 houses down, Mr. Abernathy, a widower with failing eyesight, had written a check for $2,500 for excessive holiday decorations. A single wreath he kept on his front door year-round in memory of his late wife who had loved Christmas. He showed me the certified letter he had received, identical in format to the one delivered to my grandmother. "The young man seemed so official," Mr. Abernathy explained, adjusting his thick glasses. "He had a badge and everything, said he was sorry but rules were rules." Each story increased my anger. These were not just random targets. The scammers had specifically chosen our street with its high percentage of elderly homeowners, people from a generation taught to respect authority and follow rules without question. People who might not have the resources or energy to fight back against an intimidating official-looking entity. After collecting evidence from 12 households, I reserved the small meeting room at our community center for the following evening. Phone calls went out to every home in the neighborhood. The urgency in my voice must have been convincing because by 7 o'clock, the room was filled with over 30 concerned residents, many clutching identical violation notices with matching letterhead. "Thank you all for coming," I began, connecting my laptop to the projector. "I believe our neighborhood is being systematically targeted by scammers posing as a homeowners association." The screen illuminated with documents I had gathered from county records. First, let me confirm what many of you already know. There has never been a legally registered HOA in our neighborhood. Not when it was built in the 1970s, not now. Murmurs of confirmation rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide, a business registration document. This so-called Lakeside HOA was established just 3 months ago by these individuals. The screen showed corporation papers listing 3 names, none familiar to anyone present. A further search revealed all 3 have prior convictions for similar schemes in neighboring states. Mrs. Petrovich, a retired school principal with a steel gray bun and perfect posture, raised her hand. "I refused to pay them. They threatened to put a lien on my property, but I told them I would call the police if they returned." "Did they come back?" someone asked. She shook her head. "Not yet, but they take photographs of my house almost daily." I nodded grimly. They are likely prioritizing easier targets first. My next slide caused an audible gasp, a spreadsheet estimating the total money already collected. Based on what neighbors have shared with me, These scammers have already extracted over $40,000 from our community through intimidation and lies." The room erupted in anger. Mr. Collins, who had lived on the corner for 50 years, pounded his cane against the floor. "This is criminal. We must call the police immediately." "I have contacted them," I explained, tempering expectations. Unfortunately, they classified this as a civil matter since the scammers are using legal-looking documents rather than direct threats. They suggested we each file individual complaints. "That could take months," Mrs. Jenkins observed quietly, "and some of us have already paid them." "Which is why we need to act as a community," I responded, unveiling my proposal. "I suggest we establish a neighborhood watch immediately. Document every interaction, photograph these individuals and their vehicles, record conversations if possible. Create enough evidence that the police cannot ignore." For the next hour, we organized. Phone trees were established. Surveillance shifts were assigned. Those with security cameras repositioned them toward the street. We created a shared online document where every sighting or interaction could be logged with dates, times, and details. Mrs. Petrovich stood, commanding attention as she had done for decades in her classroom. "They picked the wrong neighborhood," she declared, her voice steady with righteous anger. "We may be old, but we are not helpless." Heads nodded in determination around the room. As the meeting concluded, something had changed. The fear that had isolated each victim was replaced by collective purpose. Mr. Abernathy volunteered his garage as a central meeting point. Mrs. Jenkins offered to coordinate the phone tree. Even Mr. Collins, normally a loner, agreed to monitor the street from his front porch. As people filtered out, carrying information packets and renewed determination, I felt the first glimmer of hope since the initial threatening notice had arrived. These scammers had assumed our neighborhood, with its aging population and quiet streets, would be an easy target. They were about to discover how wrong they were. That evening, I called my brother James. Though he typically maintained an even tone regardless of circumstances, I could hear the shift in his voice as I detailed the situation with our grandmother. "These people are professional predators," he said, his words measured but underlaid with steel. "Do not engage with them again without me present. I can be there tomorrow night." The following morning, James arrived with equipment I had not anticipated: a complete security camera system with motion detection capabilities and remote monitoring. He worked methodically, installing cameras at strategic points around my grandmother's property. His military precision was evident in every perfectly aligned wire and optimized viewing angle. "This system will record continuously," he explained as the digital display blinked to life on the kitchen counter monitor. "Motion alerts will go to both our phones. All footage is backed up to cloud storage no one can access without proper authorization." I showed him the latest notice that had been slipped under the door overnight, a document threatening property seizure if my grandmother did not pay $8,000 within 3 days. James read it carefully, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "These guys are escalating," he observed quietly. "Classic intimidation tactics. Increase pressure, create artificial deadlines, make threats just plausible enough to frighten people." My attempt to file a report at the police station had been disappointing. The officer had barely looked up from his computer as he explained that without evidence of physical threats or actions, this remained a civil matter, requiring court intervention. "Property disputes happen all the time," he had said with bureaucratic indifference. "Without proof of criminal behavior, there is not much we can do." Throughout the afternoon, neighbors called with updates. The scammers had begun placing official-looking property in violation stakes in several front yards. They photographed homes openly, making notes on clipboards. Most disturbingly, they had confronted a group of children playing too loudly in the cul-de-sac, telling them activities that diminished neighborhood property values were prohibited. Outside my grandmother's window, another black SUV crept past for the third time that day. James watched it silently, his expression unreadable but his posture alert. I had seen this stillness in him before, not relaxation but the quiet readiness of a predator assessing its environment. As sunset painted the kitchen in warm orange light, James methodically unpacked his overnight bag, arranging his few possessions with characteristic order. His calm demeanor belied the intensity I glimpsed in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Grandma Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as she set a plate of fresh-baked cookies beside him. He covered her hand with his own, a rare display of affection from my typically reserved brother. "Get some sleep, Grandma," he said softly. "Tomorrow these guys learn what happens when they mess with the wrong family." She hesitated, studying his face. "James, promise me you will not do anything foolish. These men are not worth you getting into trouble." "Everything I do will be completely defensive," he assured her with a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "But I will not let them threaten you in your own home again." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, though I noticed she held his gaze a moment longer than usual before heading to her bedroom. As night fell, James and I sat silently at the kitchen table. The wall clock ticked methodically toward morning, each second bringing us closer to the inevitable confrontation. Neither of us mentioned what might happen when the scammers returned. Instead, we sipped coffee and occasionally checked the security camera feeds on James's laptop. The neighborhood outside was unusually quiet, as if the entire street held its collective breath. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Petrovich's light still on across the way. Other neighbors, too, had broken their normal routines, united in watchful vigilance as we all waited for morning. Dawn broke with deceptive tranquility. Light mist hung over dewy lawns as birds announced the new day with cheerful indifference to human concerns. Grandma Margaret followed her usual morning routine, watering her indoor plants, brewing coffee, setting out toast and jam at the kitchen table. Only the tightness around her eyes revealed her awareness of what the day might bring. James had been awake for hours, I suspected. Though he sat calmly at the table, there was an alertness to his posture that suggested he had not truly relaxed. His eyes regularly scanned the security camera feed displayed on his laptop. "They will come this morning," he said without looking up. "Their type always chooses early hours for maximum intimidation. People are groggy, off balance, not thinking clearly." At precisely 8:17 a.m., the security system chimed with an alert. A black SUV had pulled to the curb directly in front of our house. This time, it was followed by a second vehicle, a dark pickup truck with tinted windows. James closed his laptop and stood. "Stay inside with Grandma," he instructed, his voice calm but brooking no argument. But my grandmother had other ideas. She straightened her gardening apron and moved toward the door. "This is my home. I will not hide in it like some criminal." Despite our protests, she stepped onto the front porch as 4 men approached our property. Their formation suggested practiced intimidation. The 2 familiar figures from before in front, flanked by 2 larger men who remained slightly behind, creating a wall of physical presence. James positioned himself by the living room window, observing but not immediately visible from outside. His instructions to me were clear. Record everything. Do not intervene unless absolutely necessary. My grandmother descended the porch steps with dignity, her small figure standing straight in her gardening apron as she faced the approaching men. The contrast was stark. An elderly woman barely 5 feet tall confronting 4 imposing men on her own property. "Good morning," she said with remarkable composure. "I assume you have come about your notices." The taller man from previous visits stepped forward. "Margaret Wilson, this is your final compliance notice. Payment must be rendered immediately, or we will begin property seizure proceedings today." My grandmother did not flinch. "I have lived in this house for 42 years, she began, her voice steady despite her age. "There is no homeowners association with authority here, never has been." The men spread out slightly, a subtle movement that nonetheless created a more intimidating presence. The taller man thrust papers toward her face, his voice rising. "Your noncompliance has resulted in additional penalties. The current amount due is now $12,000. When my grandmother made no move to take the papers, the shorter man stepped forward and grabbed her arm. The force of his grip was immediately visible, his fingers digging into her thin skin with enough pressure to leave instant marks. Her eyes widened with shock and pain. "You will comply," he growled, leaning into her space. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. My grandmother attempted to pull away from his painful grip. The sudden movement, combined with his continued hold on her arm, unbalanced her. Her small body twisted awkwardly as she lost her footing on the uneven walkway. She fell backward, her fragile form seeming almost weightless as she collapsed onto the concrete path, with a sound that will haunt my nightmares forever. The soft thud of an elderly body hitting unyielding stone. Something primal erupted within me. I burst through the front door, my phone already recording as I rushed toward my fallen grandmother. Her face was contorted in pain, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched her wrist to her chest. "Get away from her," I shouted, fury overwhelming caution. Before I could reach her, the largest man, one of the new additions, blocked my path. His meaty palm connected with my chest, shoving me backward with enough force to knock the wind from my lungs. "This property is now under lien proceedings," he announced loudly, his voice projecting as if performing for invisible witnesses. "Interference will result in additional penalties and possible criminal charges." As I struggled to regain my balance, desperate to reach my grandmother who remained crumpled on the ground, I heard the front door slam open behind me. The sound was like a thunderclap in the morning quiet. James stood on the porch, completely motionless. In all the years I had known my brother, I had never seen him so utterly still. His eyes moved methodically, taking in every detail of the scene before him. Our grandmother struggling to rise from the concrete path, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her visibly swelling wrist. The 4 men standing over her with expressions ranging from indifference to smug satisfaction, me struggling to push past the human barrier they had formed. In that moment, I witnessed something transform in my brother's eyes, a switch flipping from civilized restraint to pure protective fury. His face remained eerily calm, but something ancient and dangerous awakened in his gaze. The scammers sensed the shift as well. The shorter man who had grabbed our grandmother straightened, his hand moving subtly toward his waistband. The others adjusted their stances slightly, reading the sudden tension in the air. "This is private property," the taller man called out, attempting to maintain control of the situation. "We are conducting official HOA business with the property owner." James did not respond immediately. He descended the porch steps with deliberate slowness, his movements fluid and controlled in a way that radiated more danger than any shouted threat could have conveyed. James approached with measured steps, his face a mask of unnerving calm. Years of security work had taught him that true intimidation comes not from shouting or wild gestures, but from controlled precision. Each movement he made was deliberate, each step carefully placed. "You have exactly 10 seconds to step away from my family and leave this property," he stated, his voice carrying the steady authority he had developed during his security contracting years. The scammers exchanged glances, momentarily uncertain how to respond to this new development. The largest man, presumably brought along specifically for intimidation purposes, recovered first. He stepped forward, chest puffed out, using his superior height and weight to loom over James. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," he threatened, his hand moving toward his hip where something metallic glinted in the morning light. James did not blink, his voice remained unnervingly level. 5 seconds. I had positioned myself beside our grandmother, helping her to a seated position while keeping my phone camera trained on the unfolding scene. Mrs. Petrovich had emerged onto her porch across the street, her own phone held high to record everything. Other neighbors began to appear at windows and doorways, drawn by the commotion. The largest scammer gave a dismissive laugh that ended abruptly as he swung without warning, a heavy fist aimed directly at James's head. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the video, we would need to slow the footage to fully understand the sequence of events. James moved with fluid efficiency, a slight shift of weight, a redirected force. He did not throw a punch. He simply was not where the fist expected him to be. Instead, he used the man's own momentum and weight against him, a textbook application of training that sent the attacker, who outweighed James by at least 50 pounds, sprawling unconscious onto our lawn. The remaining 3 men froze momentarily, processing how quickly their advantage had evaporated. The shorter man, the one who had grabbed our grandmother, recovered first. He drew a collapsible baton from his belt, the metal extending with a sinister click that cut through the morning air. "Big mistake," he snarled, lunging forward with the weapon raised. James responded with the same controlled precision. A defensive movement, a redirect of energy, a controlled countermove. The specific technique was too fast to follow, but the result was undeniable, the scammer's body lifting and propelling backward with remarkable force. The shattering crash as he impacted the bay window of our living room sent glass cascading in a crystalline shower. He landed half inside our home, the baton now harmlessly lying on our walkway. The remaining 2 men backpedaled rapidly, faces pale with shock at witnessing their invincibility shattered as thoroughly as our window. They scrambled toward their vehicles, abandoning their official business without a backward glance. Across the street, Mrs. Petrovich stood on her porch, her cell phone held high as she documented everything. "I have it all on video," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Other neighbors emerged from their homes, forming a protective semicircle around our property. Mr. Collins arrived with surprising speed given his age and cane, positioning himself in the driveway to block any potential escape of the 2 incapacitated scammers. Mrs. Jenkins appeared with her grandson, who immediately began taking photographs of license plates and the unconscious men. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Someone had called the police. The unconscious man on our lawn began to stir, moaning incoherently. The one partially embedded in our window remained motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. James knelt beside our grandmother, his battle-ready demeanor instantly replaced by gentle concern. The transition was remarkable, from efficient protector to caring grandson in the span of a heartbeat. "Let me see, Grandma," he said softly, carefully examining her injured wrist. "Can you move your fingers?" She nodded, wincing but compliant as he conducted a basic assessment. "I do not think it is broken," she whispered, "just badly sprained." I maintained my position, phone still recording as James helped our grandmother to her feet. The contrast was striking, his gentle support of her small frame versus the efficient neutralization of threats moments before. This was the brother I knew, protective without being cruel, capable of tremendous force, but choosing restraint whenever possible. The police cruisers pulled up in front of our house, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, initially tense until they assessed the scene. An elderly woman being tended by family, 2 injured men, and a dozen neighbors forming a protective circle around the property. "We have everything on video," Mrs. Petrovich informed the first officer to approach, her principal's voice brooking no argument. "These men assaulted Margaret Wilson on her own property. Her grandson acted in her defense." The police station hummed with unusual activity for a weekday morning. Detective Harris, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, reviewed the footage from our security cameras for the 3rd time. On adjacent screens, videos from 6 different neighbors' security systems and 12 cell phones played in synchronized sequence, providing an undeniable record of events. "In 20 years on the force," he said, shaking his head as he paused the footage showing our grandmother being grabbed and falling, "I have never seen such a clear case of defensive action." He glanced at James, who sat calmly beside me. "Your response was proportionate and ceased the moment the threat was neutralized. Textbook self-defense." The investigation into the fake HOA expanded rapidly once police began digging. Search warrants executed on the scammers' vehicles, and a rented office space revealed organized criminal activity far beyond what we had imagined. 17 elderly victims across 3 counties, over $200,000 in fraudulent collections, and documentation of similar schemes in neighboring states where they had outstanding warrants. My grandmother sat with quiet dignity as her statement was recorded, her wrist now properly bandaged by the emergency medical technicians who had checked her at the scene. When the detective asked if she had been afraid, her answer revealed the strength that had raised 2 generations of our family. "I was not afraid for myself," she explained simply. "I was afraid for all the people who might not have someone to protect them." The charges filed against the scammers filled 3 pages: assault, fraud, impersonating officials, extortion, and organized criminal activity. The district attorney personally assured us that the case would receive priority attention, particularly given the targeting of vulnerable elderly residents. Recovery came slowly but steadily to our neighborhood. Mrs. Jenkins and the others who had paid fraudulent fines received restitution from assets seized during the investigation. Our living room window was replaced within a week, though the slightly different colored glass served as a subtle reminder of that transformative morning. 1 month after the incident, our community gathered for a potluck dinner. Tables stretched down our street, which had been temporarily closed by permit. Children played freely while adults shared dishes and stories, the trauma of recent events giving way to a newfound sense of community vigilance and support. James, typically uncomfortable with attention, accepted thanks from neighbors whose savings he had helped protect. I watched with pride as elderly residents approached him with handshakes and hugs, his usual reserve softening under their genuine gratitude. The most significant change came in how the neighborhood organized itself. The elderly residents formed a genuine neighborhood association, not for regulation or enforcement, but for mutual support and protection. Weekly check-ins became routine. Shopping assistance for those with limited mobility became standard practice. Security system installation was coordinated as a group purchase for maximum coverage at minimum cost. As autumn leaves began to fall, my grandmother's garden bloomed with new contributions. Neighbors brought plants they had divided from their own gardens. Local teenagers built a reinforced trellis to replace the one her husband had crafted decades earlier. Mr. Collins surprised everyone by commissioning a stone bench where she could sit and enjoy her roses. Family is not just blood, my grandmother told me one evening as we watched children play freely in the street once again. It is found in the people who stand beside you when the world turns dark. The scars remained, my occasional nightmares about what might have happened had James not been there, the repaired window with slightly different colored glass, my grandmother's newfound caution around strangers. But stronger than these wounds was the knowledge that, when faced with those who would prey upon the vulnerable, our family and community had proven that justice, though sometimes imperfect, could still prevail. 1 year later, our neighborhood remains transformed. Security cameras discreetly monitor common areas. A rotating schedule ensures someone always keeps watch during vacation absences. Most importantly, the isolation that had made elderly residents vulnerable targets has been replaced by genuine connection. My grandmother's roses climb higher than ever on the new trellis. James visits more frequently now, having adjusted his work schedule to remain closer to home. And I have learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in standing together against those who mistake kindness for weakness.